Well, good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for your time.
Happy to be here.
All right. Would you mind just describing your name and then what you're all about? Like, what drives you? What are you passionate about right now?
So I'm Liz Patterson. I'm Associate Director of Annual Giving here at Trinity. And I'm actually also an alumna. So I'm class of 2005. And I guess that's a big driver for me. I've always worked in nonprofits, and I've always felt very fortunate to work for places that I really believe in. I started my career at a nonprofit library, and as a bookworm, that's kind of amazing. But even that doesn't really compare to advocating for your alma mater, and that's really what fundraising is about, is advocating for the organization for which you work. And in this case, that's higher ed, and specifically Trinity, which is near and dear to my heart. So
I was going to ask you, like, what do you believe in? So higher ed.
Education has always been something that in my family was like the highest, the utmost calling, the best thing, the thing that was going to make or break you. And so, my parents always prioritized education, and their parents had done the same for them. So, picking college was a big deal, and I loved Trinity when I first visited, and when I got here, I had such an amazing experience. And part of that was, I think, luck. I lucked out in the roommate department, but I also had incredible professors who took the time to get to know me. I was not a number. I didn't want to go to a big university where I would sit in a giant lecture hall with, hundreds of other students. I wanted to be in a small classroom. I wanted to have conversations with my professors. And that's what I got here. So that was hugely important. And, I was able to study abroad, which was an incredible experience. On a personal note, I met my husband here. So
wow.
I have a lot to thank Trinity for.
Okay, that's great. Awesome. What about the role that you're in? Who's your boss? What's the organization like? And what are you guys all about? What are your objectives?
So advancement is like the sort of overarching umbrella category that I'm in. But within that, we have different groups. So I'm part of the annual giving team. There's also the leadership giving team. There's the data maintenance team. There's planned giving. I'm forgetting something. Principal gifts. But annual giving is sort of the bread and butter. It's what the vast majority of our alums give to. So probably upwards of 3/4, closer to 80% of our alums make unrestricted gifts. So, and the Trinity Fund is like a 9 million, I think our goal is 9 million this year. So it's not like the biggest number that we raise, but it's the most flexible number. It's what kind of fills in the gaps, so tuition doesn't cover everything. The Trinity Fund is sort of the difference between having, a standard experience and having a terrific experience. So that's what we do, and I specifically work with volunteers, and I work with sort of a decade. So I work with the classes of 86 through 75, and that I manage also the 35th, 40th, and 45th reunion classes.
Okay.
Within that. And then I actually have 3 classes in the 2000s. I have 2006, 7, and 8. So I work with the volunteers. I help set their goals. Both the dollar goal for the class and the donor goal. I manage what the volunteers are doing and their outreach. And I also work in annual giving on the communication side of things. So writing appeals, both print and email. I help, plan out the course of things. What emails are we going to send when? How are we going to, if we have an email, a series of emails, which one's going to go first? When's it going to go?
Yep.
even just down to the nuts and bolts. I help pull the list sometimes. So
Okay, cool. Very helpful. Who's your boss?
Oh, Dominique Madison. So I report to Dominique, who's the director of annual giving, and she then reports to the director of development, Chuck. So.
Okay. And do you work alongside other decade people?
Yes. Yeah. So we have, there's 4 of us, besides 4 others besides me, who manage decades. So Mariana works with young alums and students. Allison Greeby works with like the lower 80s and the 90s. And then there's me. Then Teresa Kidd works with the 50th reunion and the classes after that. And then Katie Kelly works with the older classes, so like post 55th. And she also has a segment of the 2000s.
Got it.
Put it up that way.
Okay, awesome. All right. And we're here to talk about a particular process around video promos.
Yes.
I think it's titled. Can you describe how that got initiated, why that's important, what the expectations are?
So going way back, like 2 years ago, we did, exactly 2 years ago, we did an alumni survey where we sent it out to all of our alums and said, we want to hear from you. Tell us what's going on. And one of the things that came out of that survey was that alums felt like they were really proud of Trinity, but they didn't always feel like Trinity really knew who they were or what they're doing now. And one of the things that we wanted to do was make them let them know that we do care about what they're doing right now. We do want to hear from them. We want to be able to tell their stories because they're exciting and they're great stories. I think it was Chuck, our director of development, who learned about another college that had done a series of interviews with alums where they interviewed all these alums and the interviews were very like, what's up? Like, what are you doing? Like, how did Trinity help you get where you are? And they were posted on the website as stories and pushed out to alums, and that actually resulted in more giving, which is what we're all about. So he identified a professor to work with, and so we reached out to meet alums who were in that department. I think it was poli-sci. And the professor authored an email to alums saying, hey, we want to hear from you. If you're willing to be interviewed, respond to this email. So we had an overwhelming response. I mean, we picked a department that had a lot of alums. So I'm pretty sure it was poli-sci, not econ.
Do you got a sense of how many that email went out to?
It went out to everybody that we had an email for.
Is that hundreds, thousands, 10,000s?
I would 10,000 at least. Maybe not 10,000, but thousands. Because it's one of our most popular majors. Poli-sci, there are just tons of poli-sci majors.
Okay.
And even so, we got far more responses than we thought we would get. And so we got, I think, 200 people saying, like, yes, I will be interviewed. So then we had to scramble. We hired more students. The students were responsible for reaching out to these alums and saying, hey, I'm here, hi, I'm Sue from Trinity. I'm here to interview you. Can we schedule a time? And there were, a certain segment that just never responded to that outreach, or, responded and said, actually, I don't have time, or, and so, but we wound up doing, I think 100 interviews in the initial round. And even with the additional students, it was an enormous undertaking. I mean, it just much more than I certainly anticipated it being. And I think we weren't prepared for the volume, and B, weren't really prepared or set up to handle the post-interview work. So the students used something to transcribe the conversation. So we were given these Word docs that were verbatim, question and answer, the interview, including all the, preliminary, hi, how are you? How's the weather?
Yep.
So then each of us within our decade were given the interviews corresponding to our decade. So if there were alums interviewed in the 70s and 80s, they all came to me, and it was on me to then clean them up, take out all the yeah, oh, great question, all those things, and then also verify spellings of stuff. I mean, just even down to like the software had trouble even just with like the word poli-sci. Now that I'm remembering this, so like when it wasn't actually stated political science, you would be shocked at the number of different spellings it came up with for poli-sci.
Yep.
So it was a really time-consuming process to just to get them cleaned up and take out all the extraneous stuff. And then there were, times where the audio was bad, and so things would be garbled, and you would lose part of the conversation. And so I think it was on our end just much more than we anticipated. And but having said that, we got some great stuff. We got some great stories. We got some great feedback. I think that the alums who participated really appreciated the outreach and taking the time and sort of their 15 minutes of fame that it provided. And following all of this outreach, I think that it was Michael Casey, who's the VP of Advancement, who said, this was terrific. What we should really do is get short videos of these alums, which I think we were all like, well, that's a great idea, but knowing how challenging it was just to execute these for the print piece, how are we going to get these videos? How are we going to coordinate this? Who's going to take the video? Who's going to edit the video? I can edit a Word document. I have no idea how to edit a video. And then it's also identifying who is sort of the best candidate to have a video, to take their print interview and turn it into a video interview. So who has the most interesting story? Like, what are the criteria going to be for coming up with that video interview? Is it going to be based on this person's accomplishment? And if that's the case, how do we quantify, like, what's the criteria? Like, do you have to have become a VP in your organization? Do you have to have cured cancer to be worthy of an interview? I don't know. So I think that was part of some of the at least in my mind, the struggle of how do we organize this, and how do we make sure that we're making the best use of everybody's time, both the alums and the staff, and getting the result that we want.
Okay. All right, so let me just clarify a few things. One is you took an initial initiative, and that was audio-based with transcription?
Yes.
Okay. And then the video is just an idea coming out of that?
Yes.
Has that been initiated yet, or
no, because
of all these hesitations?
Yeah, and I think it's figuring out, like, how are we actually going to implement this, and how are we going to make it happen?
Okay. All right, so let's go through the process steps for the audio side. So there was a major that was selected.
Yep.
And then an email that went out.
Yeah,
and
so
then,
it was actually like, so we picked the major, and then it was identifying a professor who was willing to do the initial outreach, so that the outreach wasn't coming from the advancement department, but a professor within the major. So it was Stephanie Chambers, who, I think we came up with the text, but that email came from her.
Yeah.
So that the alums were getting this not from the administration, but from a professor, a recognizable name.
Got it. Good. Okay. And then there was students involved in that was part of, like, your workforce somehow?
Yes. So we hire student callers, and they used to be our student callers used to be primarily fundraisers, so they used to just be dialing for dollars. But we wanted to expand their scope of work, and one of the things that we wanted to utilize them for was these interview process.
Okay.
So we ended up having to hire a lot more students than we initially thought we would need. So,
because of the demand that
yes,
that
because we had such response,
Okay.
Such a greater response to the outreach than I thought.
And when you say hire, you talking about spending money?
Yes.
Like hiring? Okay.
Yeah, the student callers are paid. They are not volunteer.
Got it. And what was it like asking for more money?
That was a Katie side of things. Katie runs the student calling program, so
Okay.
I don't think it was a problem, since the director of development wanted to do it. So it's kind of like, you want to make this happen, we need more students.
Yep.
So.
And how was the interviews by the students?
I mean, I think a lot of it depends on the student, but I mean, do you mean as far as like how did they go, or?
Yeah, the questions they asked, the detail that the.
So the students were actually responsible for setting the interviews up as well. So they had to first do email and outreach to all the alums to schedule a time and pick a time, and then we did script them. So we gave them, I think it was 4 questions, just sort of, covering everything, the basics, like, so, where did your job, what was your career path after college, and how did Trinity help you get on that path? And I think that might have been a question about, like, what advice would you give to a current poli-sci student? And then, what are your other interests outside of your profession? And so I think some of the students were better than others at sort of making the interviews more conversational, and others were very, like, stick to the script. Here are the questions that I'm asking.
Okay.
So I think a lot depended on the student, but.
Okay. And how did they transcribe it? Was it a technology?
My understanding is I don't know what the program they used was, but they used something that transcribed the interviews as they just talked. They didn't have to take notes or anything like that.
And then that would come to you for your decade?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And how was that?
In some cases, like, the interview would be 2 pages. And then I had one that was like 8 pages long that I then had to take and literally clean up. So there would be just, in some cases people would just, the transcript would be just peppered with ums and and it was a big job sort of paring it down to, here's the question and here is the answer to this question, and sort of cleaning up the conversation so that the various tangents that people would go on would, if they weren't really relevant, I would try to take them out, or figure out what the person was actually attempting to get at in what they were saying in a very roundabout way. Because in a lot of cases, these alums, they didn't have the questions in advance, so it's not like they came up with answers before. They're getting the question and they're sort of thinking things through as they're talking. So you're hearing their thought process, and that is fine when you're talking to people, but it does not translate so well to the printed page.
Right.
So when we want to have something on the website, we can't have 8 pages of an interview. So it was really time consuming. It's not hard, it's just time consuming.
And did you have time allocated for this?
No.
This is on top of other work that you do?
Yeah.
Okay.
So.
So what did you do when you had, well, before that, let's actually go broad on the process steps and then deeper on some areas. So after the editing, what would happen?
I would send it over to Katie, and she was responsible for getting it posted on the blog, on the website.
Oh, okay. Got it. And how many did you get into the website for your decade?
I don't remember. It felt like millions, but I'm sure I know it wasn't. I don't remember. That Katie, I know Katie has those numbers. I don't remember exactly how many I ended up doing.
Okay, no problem. And how did it go?
I think it went well. I know that I know Katie analyzed the data, and there were some sort of segments of people who, received the initial outreach that, had better response rates as far as giving went than others. And so in some areas it was effective, and in other areas it wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And how would you measure success?
I mean, we were largely looking at giving, because that's kind of what we have to go on, and that was sort of the ultimate goal, was to increase engagement and use that as a tool to get folks to give. But I mean, I think just the response that we had alone was, I think, successful, just knowing that we had hundreds of alums who were willing to at least initially raise their hand to be a part of this.
Yeah.
Oh, they want to hear from us. Great. Here, yes, I'll talk to you. So we weren't able to connect with all of them, but I think, we put it out there that we want to listen. So
yeah, were you able to measure things like website traffic or people that actually gave as a result of reading that?
I know we have so everybody in our database has an ID number. So we had all the ID numbers of people who received the initial outreach, so everybody who was in the bigger pool of poli-sci majors, and then we had the ID numbers of the people who responded, so we were able to analyze final giving numbers for the year based on that. I know we do have the open rates and click rates for the emails that we sent, but I don't know those numbers off the top of my head.
Okay.
And I know communications tracks website traffic, but again, I don't have that.
Yeah. Did you work with communications at all with this?
No, it was largely in our office. We would have liked some more support from communications.
Okay. Did you try? Were you involved with that?
No, I was involved just sort of in the implementation process. I wasn't, communicating.
Okay.
I wasn't communicating with communications on this one.
Okay. So you got more, I'm going to go back to the process step of editing. So you received a lot of emails, and more than you expected. Then you realized it was more work than you expected on top of that. How did you sort through which ones to invest your time in over others?
I basically was given, like, here's the interviews that we've got, go ahead and have at it. So it was up to me just to make the time to get through the ones that I was given to edit.
Okay, so you just plowed through.
Yeah.
Got it. And do you see variety in these stories? Were some more compelling than others?
Oh, yeah. I mean, some of them were really interesting. And I think the thing that I like about this initiative is that it gives, I'm going to say, ordinary folks the chance to talk about their journey and how their Trinity experience and their Trinity education helped them get where they are. I think when we think about telling alumni stories, we automatically jump to, the sort of rock stars of our alumni body. So Danny Meyer, who has this restaurant empire, or, the Rachel Plattons, who become a music superstar. We automatically think of those people.
The outliers,
Right.
Yeah.
But there are people who, maybe they're not selling Grammy-nominated records, but they're experiencing their own success, and they have had their own career path. And I think that being able to highlight them, has real value, and just sort of especially for students and even alums, who are recently graduated or who are considering a career change, to hear those stories of, okay, well, here's what I did, and here's what helped me, and here's how my Trinity education and experience and the things that I learned as an undergrad have helped shape my career and my path. So I think it was, we had alums who were like 1 or 2 years out respond and get interviewed, and at first I thought, like, what are they going to have to say? But in some cases I thought those were really great stories, especially for students, of how these young alums were able to take advantage of their alumni networks to make connections and translate that into jobs, and I thought that was really compelling. Like, there were stories of young alums who, like, okay, they graduated and they made a connection. They went to some kind of a networking event. They met an alum who was in the field that they were interested in, and they kept the business card, right? So they, send an email, call them up, and get hired for an internship. Great, like, that's the first step, and then that translates into something else. And so it kind of lays this roadmap for students, if they're willing to listen, like, well, here's what you can do too. Alums are out there and they want to help you. And they want to help students, they want to help recent grads, they want to help you get your start in the same way that somebody helped them get their start. And I thought that was great, just terrific to read and sort of see it done, because I think students hear professors talk about that, but they don't necessarily know how to make it happen.
Yeah.
And there was one.
So there's a desire there, but there's no bridge to make it happen?
Yeah, and I think in some cases these interviews showed, like, okay, you can do this too. This student, this alum was just like you, was in your shoes 2 years ago, and took advantage of something that the Career Services Department offered, made a connection, and then built on that, nurtured that connection. Mm-hmm. And I think that's just a great example. And then there were some folks who, they might have majored in poli-sci, but kind of stumbled into it, didn't know exactly what they were going to major in when they came to Trinity. I remember one of them was talking about how he majored in poli-sci, but the really transformative thing for him was being part of the tripod. And it launched a career in journalism for him. And it all started with the tripod. Mm-hmm. And so, we reached out because he was a poli-sci major, but we learned something really interesting and unique, that this extracurricular activity that he was involved in led to his career.
Yep.
Which was, I thought it was just a cool story,
Yeah, definitely cool. All right. Do you have any feedback from people that have read the blog and reacted to it in some way?
No, I don't. I don't know if we have feedback that I'm just not aware of.
Just don't know.
Yeah,
that's fine. No problem. Okay, so it's just turned into 2020, and I want to give you a magic wand or a couple for this process. How would you use it?
I would I don't know, I would hire somebody in communications to take the interviews that we got, and instead of just, we wound up just posting the question and answer, we posted it as a Q&A on the blog, but I mean, I had thought, like, wouldn't it be great if we turned these into more stories, put it in more of a narrative instead of just, instead of Q&A, which has its value as well, but I thought it would be great to turn it into
less sterile, less medical, and more
more, give it a little bit more polish.
Yeah. All right.
I mean, and then if we had the resources, if I had the magic wand, then I would magically make some videos happen, where, I mean, I guess my thought would be that we would do the same interview process that we did last year, but come up with the criteria to identify who would be a great candidate for a video, and choose, I don't know how many, but 6, 8, to say, okay, like this was great. Would you be willing to do this again, but on video?
Yeah. Where does this initiative stand right now?
As far as video?
Or even the other material that maybe hasn't been edited or posted yet?
Well, right now our students are on their January break, so we don't have any students on campus right now, but I imagine we'll be relaunching into it when they're back in mid to late January.
Got it. Who's driving the initiative?
It's really been sort of a team effort with Katie and Chuck. So Katie is the sort of direct liaison with the students, but Chuck is sort of the overseeing, and he's done the work of coordinating with the professors and whatnot.
Yep. Okay, great. What do you have for remaining activities on this? Anything, or is it?
I know that there were alums who raised their hand to be interviewed, who we just never were able to connect with to interview last spring. So my understanding is that there's a significant number of them, enough to continue. We could continue with poli-sci. We wouldn't even need to do more outreach, really. So I know that we have that backlog. I don't know if the plan is to continue with them, or pick a different major and move ahead with another round. I'm not sure.
Okay. Do you know if there's any constraints or like rules that you have to follow with this process? Things you must abide by?
Usually when, if we're going to highlight a student for an appeal piece, we have to have them vetted. So that means with students, we have to check in with the dean of students and the dean of the, we have to check it. They have to be in good academic standing, that kind of thing. But I don't know really what kind of, if we have a vetting process for alums, I imagine that would be something that would be part of the criteria that we would want to use to, as we choose who would be, who we would make a video of. As far as the print stuff, we do have Trinity Style Guide. So that was part of what we were doing when we went through the editing process, was making sure that stuff adhered to the final product adhered to the Trinity Style Guide. So making sure we used Oxford commas, and is Trinity College rendered correctly, everything capitalized, are we referring to President Burger Sweeney properly, that kind of thing.
So that was both visual and, was it also narrative, the way things were described or stated?
In some cases, so that we do have, standards as far as referring to certain things, like President Burger Sweeney, the first time she's referred to should be President Joanne Burger Sweeney, and then thereafter she can be President Burger Sweeney. The library should not be referred to as the library, it should be the either Library and Information Technology Center, which is a much greater mouthful, but that's how it's officially referred to.
Yeah.
And thereafter you can use its acronym, but most alums would just say the library. But we were kind of going back in and checking on that. Oh, you know what I did forget? Part of the editing process was, once we had taken the interviews and turned them into the final Q&A, we then went back to the alum and said, here's what we're going to post online. Is this cool with you? In a more eloquent way than that. But so that was I forgot that step.
So there's a final check and balance with the
yes,
alumni.
Where
Okay.
we're saying, okay, did we get everything correct? Number one. Number two is, is there anything that you don't want put in print, put out there online? And so in some cases, people just wrote back like, "Yep, looks good. Thanks so much. Thanks for letting me know."
Yep.
In other cases, people responded with, additional details or clarifications of spellings or professors' names, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it was important. It was an important final step, but it did add to the process.
Yeah, got it. Okay. And how do you see this initiative? Is it maintaining the revenue source stream, or is it adding to your revenue, a new channel, if
It
you will?
was really intended to try to bring people back. So intended to add to revenue source and trying to get alums who had maybe lapsed in their giving to come back into it.
Okay, great.
By re-engaging.
Okay. Any parting words before we close the interview?
I don't think so.
Okay, great. You've been wonderful. Thank you so much for your time.
It's my pleasure.